Hello, my name is Elijah. I have a God story from Jim Shirley. Our friends Jim and Debbie came to our house to tell us some God stories. The story I'm going to show you today is Jim Shirley's testimony. When Jim was young, he was in the Marine Corps, but he didn't know God yet. Let's listen to Jim tell us how he came to know God.
I was saved before Mrs. Shirley was, and I was in the Marine Corps during the 60s and early 70s when the Vietnam War was going on. And I had been transferred from a base in California called 29 Palms to a base on the East Coast called Cherry Point. And on my way, I was riding a motorcycle, and I was really getting hot because it was July, and I was headed down towards St. Louis on I-70, and I got so hot I had to pull over, and I pulled into a rest stop, and there was an old man pulling a U-Haul trailer there, and he came up and said to me, "Young man, you really look hot." And I said, "Oh, I really am hot. I had bugs spattered on me and because my bike didn't have a windshield." And he said, "How would you like to put your motorcycle in the back of my U-Haul? It's empty right now, and we can probably take you 2 or 3 hours up the road." And so he did. And when he had me trapped in his car, it turned out he was an Assembly of God preacher. And he did nothing but preach at me for the next 3 hours. And so we finally got to the spot where he was headed up towards Indianapolis, and I was continuing on to North Carolina, and we separated. Well, I drove on until we got to, was not Wilmington, what was it, Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. And as I came out of my motel room, I ran into a little guy that had bad legs. It turned out he was an old man. A tank had ran over his legs in World War II and crushed them. And so he walked real funny. And he came up to me and said, "Young man, you need to have faith." And I thought, well, good grief, this trip is full of nuts. And my dad always told me to avoid people like that. And so I nodded my head, tried to be polite. And he, as I was riding off, he said, "You just remember, you have to have faith." Well, in the Marine Corps, if you're late for showing up when they tell you to, they can court-martial you. It's called missing a movement. And as I was driving down the highway, my motorcycle quit, just like somebody shut the key off. And you know how it sounds like brrrr, and just stopped. And I thought, I got 150 miles to go. I'm going to get court-martialed. And so I thought, I'll have faith. And so I sit there on my motorcycle trying to have faith. I really know what that was. And I sit there for about 10 minutes and I thought, well, you look like an idiot, just sitting here along the roadside trying to have faith. And so I jumped off my motorcycle and was getting ready to push it into the ditch and try to hide it. And here came that very same minister headed down the highway. And he pulled over. He had a brand new Dodge Polaris, which they were a huge car. And he said, "Pick that thing up and put it in the trunk of my car, and I'll take you and get something to eat, and we'll buy you a bus ticket onto your base at Cherry Point." And that's what he did. And while I was there, he told me about Jesus Christ and how he died for me. And he just asked me, he said, "Jim, do you believe that?" And I said, "Well, I do believe that." And so we prayed, and I went on my way to the base. And I didn't really get involved in church, and I didn't know what being saved means, because I didn't go to church hardly ever. And my church didn't teach that you needed to be saved, the one I went to as a boy. So I just began to feel a lot of things going my way. and I started reading my Bible. And I was just happier than I had ever been. Now, in the barracks that I was shipped to, there was a sergeant there named Sergeant Dukeman. Now, I was just a private first class, and everybody was afraid of Sergeant Dukeman because he was mean, and in Vietnam, he was part of a torture squad that interrogated prisoners. And he worked with a group called the Rock Marines, which was Republic of Korea, and they were really cruel people. Well, while he was over there, Sergeant Dukeman, a mortar shell dropped on him and really damaged his head up here, so they had to put a metal plate in his head about that big. And it made him unpredictable. You didn't know if he was going to scream and holler at you or attack you, and so everybody just avoided him because he was a little crazy. And he came around my room in the barracks one day, and he looked angrier than usual. And I just said to him, I said, Sergeant Dukeman, is something the matter with you? And he said, well, my wife and kids are back in Illinois, and I don't have enough money to rent a house here to get them shipped here. And I said, well, why don't you take my motorcycle and see if you can go find a house? And so he did, and he came back the next day and said, I found a house, but I don't have any money because they want your first month's rent, your last month's rent, and damages, which would at that time been about $300. And he was $200 short. Now, I tend to pack rat money. Do you ever hide stuff? Yeah, you're gonna come back later and get it. Well, I do that with money. And my kids are always telling me now that they've grown up, oh, don't hide money in the house. If you die, we'll never find it. And I said, oh, tough stuff. It's my money. Well, I even did it back then when I was a young man. And I had $200, well, no, I had $175 in my locker. Now, when you're a private in the Marine Corps, you get paid $120 a month. So I had been saving that for quite a while to get it. And Sergeant Dukeman came back and said, oh, if I just had another couple of $100. And I said, well, here's a couple of hundred, go rent your house and get your wife and kids out here. And he began to cry, which was always a bad sign because he was a really big, mean guy. And when he'd start to cry, he could just get really violent. And he cried and he said to me, why are you doing this for me? And I said, well, because Jesus has done so much for me and he saved my soul, and I think it's the least I can do to help you. Now, Sergeant Dukeman got his family there and everything worked out just fine for him. Well, it wasn't a long time after that I had a seizure. You know what a seizure is? Like that, and shake and bite your tongue. And now, if you're in the Marine Corps, they do not want you to serve if you have anything the matter with you. And so they immediately begin to process me out of the Corps. And I said, well, that's okay. My enlistment was about over anyway because it was 3 years. And as they got ready to ship me home, my commanding officer said to me, now you realize we're going to put you on medical type leave. We're going to transfer you to fleet retired list for 5 years. And I said, well, that's okay with me. And he said, we're going to pay you 75% of your salary for the next 5 years. Now, that added up to be $175 a month for the next 5 years. And it was exactly the amount that I had given Sergeant Dukeman. And so the lesson for that is you can share the gospel with really mean people, and God can reach out and touch their heart And the second thing is you can be generous without worrying about taking care of yourself, because God will take care of you. And that's my story.
I like how God sent him people to tell him about God. Isn't it cool how God brings people to know him? Thank you so much, Jim, for sharing your story with us. God's working in your life too. Be sure to share your stories with others. Thank you for watching.